You've been scrolling through endless grinder options, trying to picture how each one will actually sit on your countertop, how much space the motor will take up, and whether you'll end up spending a fortune on a piece of equipment that still feels finicky. The fear of buying a grinder that looks great on paper but ends up being a daily source of frustration is real, especially when you're spending enough on beans and the espresso machine itself. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into the world of espresso grinders, the first thing I realized is that most people mistake more specs for better coffee. In reality, what matters most is how consistently the grinder can produce the dose you need, how easy it is to dial in a setting and come back to it, and whether the machine fits into the rhythm of your kitchen or CAF. A lot of the hype around big-bore Burrs and digital displays can hide practical trade-offs. For example, a motor that's powerful enough for high-volume use can also be louder, and a feature-rich interface can add a learning curve that discourages experimentation. The Nuova Simonelli MDJ on-demand sits in that sweet spot between commercial-grade performance and home-friendly footprint. Its 75mm stainless steel burrs are the same size you'd see in many shop floor grinders, which translates to a more uniform particle distribution. In plain terms, that means if you set it to a fine grind for a double shot, you're less likely to get those weird Santopuck inconsistencies that force you to keep tweaking the dose. For a home barista who wants repeatable results day after day, that consistency is the hidden value most people overlook. The Micrometric grind adjustment is another practical win. It isn't a vague, corsetifying slider. Instead, it moves in tiny increments, so you can make a 0.1mm change and actually hear the difference when you pull the shot. I tried it with a light roast from Ethiopia that needed a slightly longer extraction. By nudging the setting just a notch, the espresso's sweetness popped without turning bitter. That kind of precision is useful when you're juggling beans with different roast profiles or trying to match a recipe from a coffee school. It also makes the grinder friendly for people who like to experiment, because you can write down the exact setting and come back to it weeks later. The LCD multifunction display does more than just flash numbers. It remembers your last setting, shows the grind time, and even lets you toggle between single-dose and continuous dosing modes. For me, the single-dose mode was a lifesaver during a busy weekend when I was pulling several drinks in a row. I could dial in a dose, press a button, and the grinder would stop automatically, reducing waste. The Elite Illuminated workspace is a small but thoughtful touch. It means you can see the beans and the grind chamber clearly even if you're pulling a shot at 6 a.m. when the kitchen lights are still dim. That said, the MDJ On Demand isn't without its practical downsides. First, the price point sits higher than many entry-level grinders, and while the stainless steel burrs are durable, the electronic components can be a point of failure if you're not careful with cleaning. Users have reported that the motor can get a bit noisy when you run it at the finest settings for an extended period, which is something to consider if your espresso station is close to a living space. The grinder also occupies a fair amount of counter real estate. The Portafilter holder is convenient, but it adds to the overall footprint, so small kitchens might need to plan ahead. Another subtle trade-off is the learning curve. Because the adjustment is micrometric, you can't just spin a dial and call it a day. You need to spend a few minutes understanding how each notch changes the extraction time. If you're the type who wants set it and forget it without any trial runs, you might find the process a bit intimidating at first. The LCD display helps, but you still need to keep track of the numbers you write down, especially if you switch between beans with different densities. So, who should actually consider the MDJ On Demand? If you're a serious home espresso enthusiast who already owns a decent machine and wants a grinder that can keep up with multiple beans and fine-tune each shot, this is a solid investment. Small boutique cafes that need a reliable, consistent grinder without stepping up to a full-size commercial unit will also appreciate the balance of performance and size. The grinder shines for anyone who values repeatability, wants to experiment with grind settings, and doesn't mind spending a bit more time learning the interface. On the flip side, if you brew espresso once or twice a week, or if you prefer a straightforward manual grinder that you can twist and go, you'll likely feel the MDJ's digital features are overkill. Those on a tight budget or who need a compact solution for a tiny countertop might be better off with a smaller burr size or a hand crank model. The noise factor is also a consideration if you share a